With a playoff berth in sight, the Seahawks still have some defensive injury question marks with 2 games left to play. Who has the best chance to be available coming off an injury for the Seahawks against the Steelers on Sunday? Rob Rang and I'll be breaking it all down in a new Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s out there. As always, thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it, whether you're listening in from nearby Spanaway or from Saginaw City, Michigan. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you. It's Matchup Wednesday. We're going to be diving into all the key positional battles to watch when the Seahawks and the Steelers duke it out on Sunday at Lumen Field. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This time of year, every team is dealing with injuries as we near the end of the regular season. The same goes for the Seahawks, who have 3 key defensive players with varying degrees of optimism on their latest updates from Pete Carroll. Devon Witherspoon hasn't played for a couple weeks. Jamal Adams has sat out the last 2 games. And Jordyn Brooks has played, but he has been hobbled by an ankle injury. He twisted that ankle again on Sunday in Nashville, did not return for the rest of the game. So, of course, Pete Carroll on his Tuesday morning weekly radio show this week, because Christmas was on Monday, gave updates on all 3 of these players. And the one that was the least positive was clearly Brooks, Rob. And I expected that because he didn't play the entire second half on Sunday in Nashville. They listed him as questionable to return when he checked out of the game, but he had to be helped off the field. It wasn't one of those cases where he walked off or jogged off. He had to be helped off the field. He's been dealing with his ankle injury for a few weeks. So this looks to me like it's Devin Bush season, ironically going up against the team that drafted him and he played his first 4 seasons with in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and that's exactly why it was such a priority for the Seahawks to be able to add a player with starting experience like Devin Bush. Is obviously, and Jordyn Brooks was coming off of the torn ACL. He made a remarkable recovery to be able to play as long as he has, as well as he has so far this season. And there's still a possibility that because Jordyn Brooks is as, just as savvy as he is, as competitive as he is, that perhaps he might be able to play against the Pittsburgh Steelers this weekend. But it certainly didn't feel like that, Corbin. So I do think that there is a very good chance that we will see Devin Bush be lined up next to Bobby Wagner in the Seahawks base defense. And, as you said, it's a little bit more optimistic news for Devon Witherspoon and even for Jamal Adams. With Devon Witherspoon, of course, he's been dealing with that hip pointer. Pete Carroll kind of described it as that, he's kind of buzzing around. He's got a little bit of a bounce to him this week. So perhaps we're going to see Seattle's number 5 overall draft pick back onto the field in this football game. And Jamal Adams, well, there might be a lot of Seahawks fans out there who are, kind of rolling their eyes. Oh, is Jamal Adams, if he was to return to the field, would that actually be an improvement for the Seahawks? I think that it would be. I think that his physicality against the Pittsburgh Steelers team, as big and physical as they are, as run dependent as they are, Jamal Adams in more of a linebacker role, I think that could add a little bit of versatility and a little bit of toughness to the Seahawks defense if he is available. But of course, tip of the cap to what Julian Love has said. The way that Julian Love has played, I think this is Julian Love's job, and Jamal Adams is going to have to get back onto the practice field and earn back that spot. I don't think that this is something that should just be handed back to Jamal Adams. But all that said, again, the overriding story here is a lot of optimism here at the midweek point, and it does look like the Seahawks are going to have at least some of their defensive stalwarts back on the field.
Yeah, on the Brooks front, he was clearly the most negative update for Pete Carroll on Tuesday morning. He said there are questions there and then added it's going to be hard to get him back. And I don't think he was referencing the rest of the year. I was thinking it was this week against the Steelers. I think this is still something that the Seahawks are hoping maybe if they rest him this week, that he's going to be feeling good enough. Maybe you get him back for the season finale against Arizona. They do have a proven starting caliber linebacker ready to play. And I thought Devin Bush played pretty well in the second half against the Titans on Sunday. So he's going to looking like he's going to get that first start for the Seahawks this year, starting in place of Jordyn Brooks. I'd be really shocked if the Seahawks rush Brooks back for this game. Maybe they get it back for the season finale, but this is an injury that's been bothering him. I think he needs a week to try to get right. Ankle sprains can be tricky in that regard, but can they get him back for week 18 and at minimum get him back for the postseason? As for Witherspoon, as you mentioned, Pete Carroll was saying he was bouncing around. He was running at the facility this week. They tried to get him out there on Sunday before the game in Nashville, and he just couldn't quite loosen that hip up enough to be able to play. But a few more days of rest, it's looking more likely they're going to have him back out there. Adams, that really does feel like the 50-50, as you mentioned, with this quote from Pete Carroll. Jamal wants to try to play this week. He's going to see where he is. He's had some rest now. He may be able to bounce this week. We'll find out. I don't know the answer to that yet. I don't know where you stand on this update, Rob. I agree with you if Jamal Adams is right, if he's healthy, that this is an opponent, the Pittsburgh Steelers, that I could see him come out and actually have a really positive impact against them because of his skill set. But I think that the health question is really the biggest part of this. Are you getting a healthy Jamal Adams out there on the field? Is he going to be able to play to the level that you expect him to play at? Reading through the tea leaves, and this is just my interpretation, it sounds to me like Pete Carroll saying, if Jamal Adams is right and he's healthy enough, then yes, we'll get it back out there. But I am not going to be rushing to play this guy just because he's Jamal Adams and the contract he has, if I don't think he's right and I don't think he's going to help our defense be better. That's the way that I interpreted this. They don't know where he's at right now.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it bears repeating just the significance of the injury that Jamal Adams has recovered from and has been playing through so far this season. There was some more conservative thinking out there that didn't think that Jamal Adams was going to be able to play at all this season. So those out there who are criticizing Jamal Adams, and say what you will about his struggles and pass coverage and things like that, certainly I don't think that anybody should be questioning his toughness. I think that this is a young man who has demonstrated that he is remarkably tough. Now, at the same time, the playmaking skills that Julian Love has shown in Jamal Adams' absence, I think certainly bears acknowledging just as much. And the reality is the Seahawks defense has been playing very well these last couple of weeks. And the way they were able to slow down that vaunted Philadelphia Eagles football team, and then, of course, in the victory just this past weekend, it really does show that a defense that is starting to gel. So I don't think that you want to mess with the chemistry that is developing there. But again, just acknowledging the opponent, the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team that has more interceptions than they do touchdown receptions so far this season. I think this is one of the opponents that you do want to bring the physicality to try and slow down that Pittsburgh running game. And again, that's one of the things that Jamal Adams can do in the box. He is absolutely dynamic. And so again, I just want to again, I think that the Seahawks are going to try to encourage Jamal Adams to get back onto the field if he is up to it. But at the same time, that does not necessarily mean that he would be a starter.
Yeah, it could be a situational role. As we talked about, that might be best for all parties because I don't know that he can handle the workload being an every snap player right now. Maybe next season he could do that, but this is an injury that it could take 12 months or longer to really get all the way back from, if you can do it even then. There are a lot of players who have had this surgery that weren't quite the same player coming back. The Seahawks are still holding out hope that happens at the same time. Again, it just sounded to me like Pete Carroll, and I've been reading this for a few weeks, I think that he has been quietly hinting, hey, if he's right, we'll bring him back. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be starting. That doesn't mean that he's going to be playing the role that he thinks he should be. I think there's some complicated discussions that have been going on behind the scenes between the team and the player. It's something that goes on with a lot of teams this time of year, even your playoff caliber squads. Up next, we're going to shift into our weekly matchup Wednesday. Seahawks defense going up against a Steelers offense that found some life last week in a win over the Cincinnati Bengals. We'll get to those matchups coming up next here on Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Game Time. If you've ever been on the hunt for sports or concert tickets at the last minute, the process can be anxiety-provoking. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. You shouldn't be ripping your hair out and looking like me. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And they've got killer deals on last-minute tickets, and their best price guarantee ensures you won't have to stress over the tickets and you can start getting hyped for all the fun you're going to have. If you want to see the Seahawks and the Steelers duke it out at Lumen Field on Sunday using Game Time's awesome flash time deals feature and a detailed stadium map, you can find awesome seats for under $105 right now. It's super easy. Forget the planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right into the day of the event. And if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference with their Game Time guarantee. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. You're listening to Matchup Wednesday here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there during this holiday season. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Let's shift gears now to Week 17. It's crazy to believe we have 2 weeks left in the regular season, the 2023 NFL campaign. The Seahawks with their final home game of the season against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's assuming, obviously, that the Seahawks don't jump up to the 6th seed and then the 6th and the 7th seed advance to the NFC Championship game. That is the only way the Seahawks would play at Lumen Field again this year. But this is most likely going to be the last time that they play in front of the 12s. They are going to be bringing the noise on New Year's Eve. This is a Steelers team that has fired their offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, a few weeks ago. Most of this year, it has been a struggle for them to put points on the board. But with Mason Rudolph under center and Mike Tomlin confirmed he's going to start against the Seahawks, he had the best game of his pro career last week against Cincinnati in that beatdown of the Bengals. Now the Seahawks get to deal with him and an offense that finally found some traction. The Steelers are on the outskirts of the playoff race, still in the AFC. So this is a game that means a lot for both of these squads. Looking at the Steelers offense versus Seahawks defense, Rob, what's the first matchup that jumps out to you going into this game?
Well, I think that it has to be trying to get some pressure on the opposing quarterback. As you said, the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin, confirmed that it is going to be Mason Rudolph who is going to be the starter at the quarterback position. And, you know, he had a strong performance against Cincinnati a week ago, but his NFL career has been pretty helter-skelter since he was drafted in the middle rounds at Oklahoma State several years ago. The Pittsburgh Steelers have started 3 different quarterbacks so far this season. Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and the aforementioned Mason Rudolph. I was very encouraged by what I saw from Boye Mafe a week ago against Tennessee. Obviously, that was a road game, but Boye Mafe to have 2 sacks and multiple quarterback pressures in that football game just suggests that the Boye Mafe that we saw star early on and then through the midway point of this season might be on the return. And Dan Moore on the one side, the rookie Broderick Jones on the other side for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That just feels like a matchup that the Seahawks pass rush, especially considering the fact that they're going to be at home, should be able to exploit a little bit. And again, Mason Rudolph at the quarterback position, Corbin, he's not seen a lot of playing time in his NFL career. But what I remember of him at Oklahoma State was that he was a quarterback that could get a little bit skittish when he was getting hit. Most quarterbacks are that way. He certainly was that way. And so again, I think that this is a matchup that the Seahawks might be able to get some pressure on Mason Rudolph and perhaps be able to create some turnovers of their own.
And you mentioned the tackles here. And Broderick Jones, the rookie out of Georgia, I think has a ton of talent. He was the number 12 pick in this year's draft. He's a player they're very excited about. He has started most of the games this season, but he's been up and down, as you would expect from a rookie. The matchup where I think the Seahawks can have the most success, though, is against Dan Moore on the other side. He's given up 7 sacks this year, more than 50 pressures per PFF. Watching a lot of their games, there's been a lot of pressure that's come off that side, and he hasn't necessarily gotten a job done in the run game consistently either. This is a team up until the last few weeks that has not been able to run the football. They've had a lot of issues moving the ball on the ground with the running back talent they have. They've got some pretty good running backs. They have not been able to get things going. So I look at this as a matchup that Boye Mafe, Darrell Taylor, if he can get up against either one of these tackles with his burst up field, I think this could be a game that he creates a lot of havoc getting into the backfield. For some reason, the Bengals were not able to do that for most of last week. But if the Seahawks can take advantage of those tackles, then I think that this can be a game that could be very difficult for the Steelers front line, especially the inside. If those guys on the outside are getting pressure, it is going to open things up for Leonard Williams and the rest of this defensive line. So I feel like this could be a matchup that really plays to the Seahawks, especially in front of their home crowd. Now, a matchup that may not necessarily work in the Seahawks' favor on the outside, George Pickens, it's crazy how NFL news changes. 2 weeks ago, he was getting lambasted by the media, as he should have been, for choosing to take a business decision and not blocking for Jaylen Warren near the goal line. And he said, I didn't want to get injured. This last week, it felt like he had 5,000 yards against the Cincinnati Bengals in that game receiving, but he had one of the biggest games of his career. The Bengals could not cover him. He had a bunch of deep balls that he caught. It was a fantastic performance. He's at over 1,000 receiving yards this year, just 5 touchdowns, but a lot of that's been the receiving issues they've had, the passing game issues in general with multiple quarterbacks playing. But this is going to be a real test for Riq Woolen, Mike Jackson, if Devon Witherspoon plays, whoever is covering George Pickens. And they've got a couple other decent receivers on this football team too, but George Pickens is the alpha dog of this receiving core that has the ability to take over games. He showed that last week. He and Mason Rudolph had a really good connection. If they carry that over to this game, this is going to be a major challenge for Riq Woolen and the rest of the secondary. Even with the talent Seattle has back there, George Pickens has the upside to be a top 3 caliber receiver in this league. He's that dominant when he's rocking and rolling.
He really is. I think that's all very well said. I mean, the Steelers do have some pretty talented wide receivers opposite him. Deontay Johnson is a good football player. Allen Robinson, another good football player, a big guy that they can move inside to play that slot receiver role. But, you know, when you're talking about a guy like George Pickens, Corbin, I mean, he leads the Steelers in receptions, receiving yards, touchdown receptions, third down receptions. I mean, he is the guy for them. And so I really think this is going to be an interesting matchup to see what Seattle tries to do. If Devon Witherspoon is back on the field, this might be one of those matchups where you're just trying to line up your number one corner, who of course is Witherspoon, up against George Pickens, because he does have the speed and the playmaking ability to make Mason Rudolph think twice about throwing those deep balls. If it's not Devon Witherspoon, then I really think this has to be Riq Woolen, because again, one of the things that makes George Pickens unique is that he's 6'4" and runs a 4.3. I haven't been as big of a Mike Jackson fan as anybody out there, but that is not his game. His game is more physicality. I think that he would be better suited to go up against maybe an Allen Robinson, somebody like that. George Pickens can leave you in the dust, as he did, as you mentioned, against the Cincinnati Bengals. And so I think you have to have a corner who can turn and run with this guy. Otherwise, that is definitely a matchup the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to try to exploit. And again, one of the easiest ways of trying to quiet down a probably raucous Lumen Field crowd is to be able to create a big play over the top. I think that Quandre Diggs done a terrific job of eliminating the big, deep ball kind of throws that opponents are trying to get. But again, when you are trying to come up close to the line of scrimmage to slow down the Pittsburgh running game, then that's going to leave some potential opportunities for the Pittsburgh Steelers to go deep. So again, whoever the corner is that they play opposite George Pickens, I think it has to be somebody who can actually turn and run with him. To me, that would be Witherspoon or Riq Woolen.
Let's shift to the other key matchup in this game, and some of it's being impacted by the injuries that we mentioned at the beginning of the show, because the one player of the 3 we talked about that I do not think is playing this week is Jordyn Brooks. And one of the things that's gotten going for the Steelers the last few games, they've been able to get Najee Harris on track. Jaylen Warren is one of the best complementary running backs in the NFL, a twitchy guy that can make guys miss. He's a really sound pass catcher, and he's averaging over 5 yards per carry this year with over 600 rushing yards. So they have featured him quite a bit in their offense. Even when they've struggled, he's put up good numbers. But I'm looking at that matchup going up against Bobby Wagner, who is still playing good football, but against athletic pass catching running backs, there's been some issues at times. And Devin Bush, you're going against your former team. Sometimes that could be an issue where guys really try too hard to get that revenge game. Can he stay within himself as he did in the second half last week? And he's got the speed to be able to cover running backs out of the backfield. He's shown he can defend the run. The Seahawks have gotten solid play out of him in his limited snaps on defense, but I would believe that the Steelers are, with their familiarity with Devin Bush, I would think that they are going to try to test him both in the run game and the passing game because he had some issues in coverage after that torn ACL in Pittsburgh. They're going to try to test him and try to scheme to find ways to get running backs one-on-one with him, even receivers against him. And so I think the linebackers are going to have a lot of pressure on them in this football game against a team that, away from George Pickens, they're not going to be chucking a lot of balls downfield. They're going to be attacking the middle with the short to intermediate game, and they're going to emphasize the run game. That puts a lot of pressure on your linebackers, and Devin Bush is going to get a ton of snaps without Jordyn Brooks out there.
Yeah, again, very well said. I think that the Steelers, of course, know Devin Bush very, very well. And one of the things that I remember of him in Pittsburgh and certainly at the University of Michigan, where he was the first-round selection, is just his speed and his aggression. This is a linebacker that sometimes can be victimized by his own over-aggression. He will, run upfield to try to get pressure on the quarterback and leave himself vulnerable to screens and things like that. And when you have two backs who are as dynamic as Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, then that is a potential liability. Najee Harris is the bigger, but also the slower of the two backs. Jaylen Warren, as you mentioned, he just has some stop-start quickness, some lateral agility. He can make people miss in the open field, and we all know how much Seattle has struggled with open field tackling at their worst this season. At their best, they have played very well. And that was one of the encouraging signs that we saw in this latest victory against Tennessee Titans is how the Seahawks kind of tightened up their defense. There was a lot of big hits. There was a lot better wrapping up as well. That's what I think the Seahawks are going to have to do. Otherwise, I could see the Steelers really trying to focus in on their running backs, trying to take advantage of, say, a Bobby Wagner, who, let's admit, he's not the 4-4-2 guy that he once was at the linebacker position. So there have been some vulnerabilities by the Seahawks defending running backs out of the backfield. If I was the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, that would be my game plan, is to try to get the ball into the hands of the running backs in the flats and see if Seattle has the linebackers or the safeties. I mentioned Jamal Adams before, or the safeties to be able to kind of cover these running backs and limit them to 3, 4, 5 yard plays rather than the 10 plus 12 yard plus chunk plays that the Steelers running backs have used effectively to kind of get their offense on track here over the last month.
We're going to flip the script. Up next, we're going to look at the Seahawks on offense. At home, they're going to look to keep things rolling after back-to-back comeback wins, getting those game-winning drives. So we'll look at Geno Smith and company going up against a Steelers defense that is very stingy and has a lot of talent at all three levels. Don't go away. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make all my picks and submit them in less than 60 seconds. And now that basketball season is here, you can do the Specials League for combo projections across football and basketball. For example, I can have Steph Curry and Tyler Lockett at 12.5 three-pointers plus receptions. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy. To me, this is the best part about Prize Picks. Your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. And for football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't come back in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform that has an injury insurance policy. It's an absolute blast each week and an easy way to win daily fantasy without any hassle. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first-time deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You're listening to Matchup Wednesday here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Happy holidays, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Let's continue our key position by position breakdowns here. Matchup Wednesday. We just looked at the Seahawks going up against the Steelers offense. Now we're going to look Seahawks offense going up against a very talented Steelers defense that's got a couple of potential future Hall of Famers. I think there's at least two on this defense that the Seahawks offensive line is going to have to deal with. And Rob, this is one of those matchup shows where, sometimes we debate which one is most important. To me, there is no debate here. It is TJ Watt off the edge going up against Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. I think TJ Watt is already a first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't think that's a stretch when you consider he has now had multiple seasons with at least 18 sacks. The guy is a machine off the edge. He's a game wrecker. He forces fumbles like every game, it feels like. And Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross have to deal with this guy. And it's crazy. J.J. Watt is going to be a Hall of Famer in his own right. And I think you can make the argument that T.J. Watt is the better player from the family. Talk about a talented DNA strand there for the Watts. Their other brothers played the NFL for like 8 years too as a fullback. So this guy is an absolute stud. He's one of my favorites to watch. And now the Seahawks tackles, they're going to have to deal with him. And you better have some help for Cross and Lucas, because this guy will dominate any tackles in the league week in, week out. Doesn't matter what the matchup is. He's versatile in how he attacks guys. He can win with speed. He can win with power. He can win with counter moves. He is just flat out dangerous off the edge.
He is absolutely dominant. He should be the defensive player of the year, in my opinion, which is something that, of course, his older brother, J.J. Watt, did multiple times. T.J. Watt, he's going for to lead the NFL in sacks for the third time in his NFL career. As you mentioned, it feels like every year he's got 18 plus. Currently has 17 right now, which leads the NFL. He's got 4 forced fumbles. He's terrific against the run as well. 34 tackles for loss. 16 tackles for loss, which leads the Steelers, of course. And it's not just about TJ Watt. I mean, they have a very good player on the opposite of him, and Alex Highsmith, number 56, who's got 7 sacks of his own. He's got 17 quarterback hits.
Very underrated player, Rob.
He is. He's got 2 interceptions. 1 he returned for a touchdown. He's got 2 more forced fumbles as well. So again, I love that you mentioned both of Seattle's offensive tackles. Now, primarily, TJ Watt is going to be lined up as a left outside linebacker spot. That means he's going to be going up against the right tackle, Abe Lucas, who, of course, is only a couple of games into this season. Well, he better strap him up for this football game, because, again, TJ Watt, is we've both, showered him with praise in this build up to the football game. I mean, TJ Watt is an absolute superstar, but again, when you have a player like Alex Highsmith on the opposite side, whoever is the tackle that isn't taking on TJ Watt that particular moment, then he is also going to have a significant matchup as well. So to me, this is one of the interesting things, is we were kind of discussing prior to the recording of today's show. We knew that this was going to be the primary matchup here that you had to watch, for the Steelers, regardless, offense, defense, special teams, whatever. I think that this is a game that the Seahawks have to put that type of attention into it as well. And that might mean keeping your tight ends in more to block. Of course, we're coming off of a game in which Colby Parkinson made the game-winning touchdown reception. To me, this is a game where instead maybe you might see a little bit more Will Dissly pinched inside Colby Parkinson, who's improved in the pass protection as well. I do think that you have to have a real game plan to be able to slow down these 2 pass rushers. As I mentioned before, this is a Pittsburgh Steelers team that has more interceptions than they do touchdown receptions. They are top 5 in the NFL in sacks yet again. This is a Steelers defense that's so good they can overcome the fact that the Steelers offense is only scoring 17 points a game. there's only 5 other teams in the NFL who have that many points or are averaging that few of points, and none of them have a winning record the way the Pittsburgh Steelers do. So much has changed, of course, over the years, but it's still Blitzburgh. It's still the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they still can win just on their defensive alone. So that's why it's going to be critical that the Seahawks slow down. Number 90, especially TJ Watt, but 56, Alex Highsmith as well.
Yeah, and I think this game is about more than just those guys. To me, we talk trench play every week, but from a Seahawks offensive perspective, I look at the interior defensive line too. Cameron Hayward is another player that I think is very much in the Hall of Fame discussion. He has been that kind of a talent, multiple All-Pro selections, a ton of Pro Bowl selections. He's got the stats to back it up. The guy is still a monster defending the run. He missed a big chunk of this season with an injury, but he's back out there. And then we talked underrated players with Alex Highsmith. Larry Ogunjobi, the guy has played for every team in this division except the Ravens. He's still got time to get over to Baltimore at some point, but I think he is one of the most criminally underrated players in the NFL. And so this is one of those games where I'm not looking at the secondary because I just feel like there is so much emphasis on trying to keep Geno Smith clean. And if you're going to run the football, you're going to have to find a way to block Cam Hayward and Larry Ogunjobi. Hayward being more of the run defender, Ogunjobi being more of the pass rushing threat in the interior. But those guys are going to give you problems in the interior. And so I just look at this matchup too, Rob. The tackles, TJ Watt's the most important player to watch on the field for the Steelers, but those guys in the interior, they might not get the love, but they are just as crucial to the success of this dominant defense that has allowed them to post an 8-7 record with a bottom 5 offense this year.
Yeah, it really is. And again, you took the words right out of my mouth here, basically, as far as Cameron Hayward and his potential to someday wear the golden jacket. Larry Ogunjobi, I mean, he plays like a Baltimore Raven, so it's actually kind of comical that he has not yet played for the Ravens. And I didn't even mention the rookie, Keanu Benton, who you and I are both very high on in the pre-draft process. I mean, he's got 7 quarterback hits of his own, so he's been very effective. Has been a kind of a on-again, off-again starter with Cameron Hayward missing some time, as you mentioned earlier. They really do have a pretty formidable rotation of big men in the middle of that defense. And considering the fact that Seattle, of course, has had some injury issues, fortunately, one of the news pieces that came out during his press conference on Wednesday is Pete Carroll acknowledged that Damian Lewis, Seattle's starting left guard, is going to be fine. He is expected to play and to start in this football game. That may not be the case for the big offensive lineman Jason Peters, who was rotating in with Anthony Bradford in this past game against the Tennessee Titans. He's dealing with a plantar fascia issue that might limit him, but it does sound like Seattle's going to have their expected starters, Damian Lewis and Anthony Bradford, at the guard positions. Those are big, burly guys. Evan Brown, of course, the center position, has provided a lot of leadership and just recognition at the line of scrimmage. Pittsburgh isn't creative. They are just fast, physical, and technically sound with their blitzes and things of that nature. So Seattle's going to have to kind of just match up in terms of the physicality at the line of scrimmage. Otherwise, again, as we just talked about, the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive front, linebackers and traditional defensive linemen, they're good enough to be able to overwhelm Seattle at the point of attack and steal this victory.
Anytime you're talking tradition with the Steelers, the one thing that still holds true, it feels like they always have a safety that is that keep your eye on him at all time safety. You had Troy Polamalu, and now it's Minkah Fitzpatrick. Now, he did not play last week against Cincinnati. He was expected to practice this week, though. So if Minkah Fitzpatrick's back out there, we're talking about a guy that's had several seasons where he's been among league leaders in interceptions. He doesn't have any this year, knock on wood. It's been kind of a quiet season for him, but part of the reason is opposing quarterbacks tend to stay away from him wherever he's at. He has always been a guy that finds the football anyway. That hasn't happened as much this year, but for Geno Smith, this is a matchup to me. Geno Smith, he has to know where TJ Watt is, and you absolutely got to know where Minkah Fitzpatrick is if he plays in the game, because he's that money defender that you can move all over the place. He can play nickel corner. He can play outside corner. He can play both safety positions. He can play linebacker. The guy is an incredible talent that he can move all over. He is that true definition of a defensive chess piece. and he's got great ball skills. He can blitz. He can do it all. So Geno Smith's got to know where Minkah is out there if he plays in this game, which still remains to be seen.
It does. He went down with a knee injury, did not play against the Cincinnati Bengals a week ago. And so the Seahawks might get lucky and you may not have to deal with Minkah. But if that's not the case, then the Steelers have another playmaker. Damontae Casey is a guy that's a little bit on that underrated list, in my opinion, as well. And then the one that
he's not going to play because he got suspended for the rest of the season for hitting remember he hit Pittman on Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's what it was. Good call. But the other one I was going to mention is the one that actually concerns me the most from a Seattle perspective. And Pete Carroll acknowledged his great respect for Patrick Peterson. Now, Peterson has lined up at cornerback for most of this season, but because of the Casey suspension, because of the fact that Minkah Fitzpatrick has missed some time, Patrick Peterson, the last 2 games, has primarily played at the safety spot. The size, the speed, the physicality, the awareness, all of those traits that made him an all-pro at corner also translate to the safety spot. Corbin, I think that we talked about the Hall of Famers, and you mentioned Cameron Hayward as being one of those guys, and obviously TJ Watt. I really think that Patrick Peterson is going to be in Canton someday soon as well. 5 years, maybe 6 years after he decides to hang him up, because we're talking about one of the elite athletes I've ever seen in the secondary, regardless of strong, free, nickel, outside corner, regardless. The man can just do it all. He is not, of course, the player now that he was back in the day. But still, I think that he is absolutely terrific football player. And I think that he is exactly the type of savvy veteran that might be able to make this game a little bit more complicated. Even if Geno Smith has enough time to throw the ball deep down the field, it's got to be the accuracy that we've seen from Geno Smith at his best. Otherwise, again, I think that if the Seahawks can just keep the turnover battle close. The Steelers lead the NFL. This is, again, one of the reasons why that they are competitive at this point, and they are fighting for their playoff lives. It's a must-win game for them, is because they lead the NFL, the plus 10 turnover ratio. And that's remarkable considering how, frankly, impotent their offense has been all season long. But again, it's a testament to the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And again, if the Seahawks can at least keep that close, obviously you want to win the turnover battle. You just can't lose at 2, 3, 4, because this Steelers defense can do exactly that. If the Seahawks can do that, keep that close, and I do think that they can win this game.
As always, you can follow me on X and on Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we will have a crossover Thursday special, Locked On Seahawks, Locked On Steelers. Make sure that you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night. Go Hawks.